social scientists, so that they can study these phenomena and tell us what's accurate and what's not, what's myth and what's truth. What happens is that we bifurcate the two issues of misconduct and separate them. Corruption is usually treated more seriously than brutality. Bratton goes in, grabs the badges, but when the brutality numbers come out, he kind of rationalizes.
Mr. Smurdy, what do you think? What do you think of a big board?
As you're talking about this,
ridiculous to have a big board.
I didn't say big. I said quality board.
Ridiculous to fuse the two of them.
You don't think they're linked? You don't think brutality and corruption are linked?
No, they're not.
Did you read the Mullen Commission report?
Yes, I did.
And what do you say with regard to their findings?
I disagree with their findings.
When cops are sent
can we
to
have Mr. Smurdy respond?
Sure.
Look, what's happening with the Civilian Complaint Review Board is this. Most of the complaints are not of brutality. Most of the complaints are ridiculous complaints, such as, oh, this police officer gave me a ticket even though I showed him a PBA card.
It's not true.
Mr. Siegel,
you want to bet a chocolate egg cream? That the force and abuse complaints are the serious complaints.
I'll bet you the mortgage. Let me ask you, how many police officers have you represented at CCRB?
I don't represent police officers.
I do.
Right.
And
I
I'm telling
represent the
you,
people who make the complaints.
And I'm telling you that I've been down to CCRB many times.
How many times?
25, 30?
25 out of 5,000, yes. And you're prepared based on that sampling to make wide conclusions as to guard what's going on at the CCRB.
I'm not making wide conclusions. I've spoken with individuals who are down there every day, and I'm telling you from my personal experience and from my conversations with other individuals, you have so many complaints of things like that. The police officer gave me a ticket even though I showed him a PBA card. You have anonymous complaints where a police officer is accused by an anonymous individual, and yet he's dragged down there.
Are you aware
and he has to give a statement?
Are you aware that force complaints went up 41% in 1994, and abuse complaints went up 50%? Those are the most serious allegations that a citizen can make: force and abuse.
And how many were substantiated?
Mr. Smurdy, I'd like to move on.
The problem with the CCRB, Eric, it takes about a year and a half before you get a resolution.
Excuse me, Eric.
We don't have those numbers yet.
Do you have any numbers?
We have numbers with regard to from 92 and 93. And the percentages are about 10%.
I want to get back to.
Wait a minute, 10%. That's not too good.
Eric,
exactly. That's why I said the CCRB is not as good as it should be.
Once a complaint is substantiated,
because
wait,
they're
everybody,
not being
we can't all talk at the same time.
I'm asking a question. You say 10% of the complaints were substantiated?
Right.
And
that's not a lot.
And once the complaints are substantiated, then the police officer has a right to trial. And I submit to you that once he goes to trial, 75% of those 10% substantiated are found not guilty.
Mr. Smurdy, excuse me, we all can't talk at the same time. Mr. Smurdy, I want to get back to a point you made earlier. I want to get back to and kind of explore the philosophy of perception. And you said that there's a perception that police officers are brutal and afflict more abuse. I wanted to explore the dumping grounds, as they're called by some officers.
I don't know that I had said that they were.
No, I'm saying
there was a perception.
You said,
I'm saying
that they were more brutal.
No, I'm saying you said there was a perception earlier that cops are brutal in the community. That's what you said.
I didn't know that I
don't
said.
remember.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Do you not think that's accurate? That there's a perception in the community of that?
There is a perception.
That's what he said.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
Agreement.
Okay,
let's go.
Eric,
in some communities, not all.
Right.
Well,
I think mostly minority communities.
Eric alluded to earlier some anecdotal stuff. Let me just throw some facts on the table. In the Mullen Commission, there was an officer, an ex-cop named Bernard Cawley. They talked about dumping grounds, minority communities being dumping grounds, and how they thought that they were being punished. White officers would be punished being assigned to an African American or a Latino community. Cawley, in fact, was quoted as saying, quote, "We beat whoever walked by in those particular communities." What is the perception of police officers in the New York City Police Department and the way they think about and deal with minority communities?
Let me put it this way. How can you be a New York City police officer and not be prepared to deal with minorities? I don't know of any precinct in this city, outside perhaps of some of the boroughs, some of the precincts on the borough of Staten Island, where you don't have a significant amount of minorities, whether it be Asians, blacks, Hispanics, whatever.
Where? You mean in the police force? Is that what you're saying?
No, in the communities that they police.
In the community.
And is it a coincidence that the CCRB now is investigating 4 precincts in the Bronx, and they have the highest rate of police abuse complaints?
50% increase in the 4.
And they happen to be poor in minority communities. Is that a coincidence?
It's It's explainable because you're going to have more complaints in minority communities.
Why?
Because there are more arrests in minority communities, there's more contact between the police and potential perpetrators in minority communities. And what we said at the outset was that a lot of these complaints...
All minority communities are...
There are more arrests in minority communities.
No,
yes,
you said greater perpetrators. You didn't say arrests.
I said there were more arrests in minority communities, and when you have contact between police
Not
and
greater
potential...
perpetrators
and
in minority
between
communities.
police and
That's
potential...
what you said.
And police and potential perpetrators, that's where complaints arise. Some of them are valid, many of them
But
are
only
not.
12
Only
Some are valid,
10%,
some are not.
so only 10% turn out to be valid, an exceptionally low
Are
number.
the majority of these complaints not valid?
Well,
10%.
at this point, 10%
That's
have
not
been
a lot,
substantiated.
Michael.
But-
90% are invalid.
No, but the old system was
90% are invalid.
Right, but it goes to the problem
That's a
of...
lot.
I understand what you're saying, and I'm not disagreeing with
know
you.
you're not,
But what
because
I'm saying
we've
is that
discussed
the
this before.
system is still not a valid system. We've made some increase. The old system was 3.5% substantiation. Now it's 10%. But you still have to improve the system with regard to the investigation of these complaints. You have to be able to set up a system that both the cop and the citizen feel confident in. We've made progress, but we're not there yet.
Mr.
But when
Smurdy-
you said about before about the interaction, remember in '94 only 12% of the complaints came out of the arrest situation. So your premise, I think you have to revisit again.
Mr. Smurdy, isn't it true that a number of these cases actually fall through the cracks? Some of the substantiated cases. What happens, in fact, when a case is brought to...
On substantiated cases? Substantiated cases...
When cases are substantiated.
When
what
cases
happens?
are substantiated, the police officer will then go either to the New York City Police Department trial room or to OATH, which is the Office of Administrative Trial and
Are they
Hearings.
followed up onto your satisfaction?
Norman, is there any
And there'll be a
evidence?
trial.
Eric,
There'll be a
excuse
trial.
me, I'm asking Mr. Smurdy a question here.
The trial is, in the New York City Police Department, is conducted by what's called the Deputy Trial Commissioner, who's appointed by the Commissioner of Police.
And they're police employees, and we have to change that too, because the rate of success by those police lawyers are way too low. And I've watched some of those proceedings, and I came out very concerned about the quality of representation in those proceedings. We need to also have a civilian legal unit that will prosecute those cases as opposed to the police employee lawyers doing those cases. That's a further change in the system that's required.
I've tried 30 or 40 cases in the
Right.
New York City trial room, and I'm telling you that these prosecutors are out for blood.
And
They
what about
want
their
a
rates? What
they
their
want
rates
a
of
conviction.
success on finding people guilty after trial?
Well, maybe that's
You know
not-
what it was? It was 9% in '94. That is very alarming to me based on some of the fact patterns that I'm aware of that go to those proceedings.
And I'm telling you that that can be explained by two things. One, the advocates for the defense, for the police officers, happens to be very good. You have some excellent attorneys doing this. And on the other hand, you have some complaints that just don't belong there. They've been substantiated by civilians in the Civilian Complaint Review Board. They don't know police department procedure. They don't know the New York City Patrol Guide. They don't know
And
anything
you're
about
not at
police
all
work.
concerned about that police employee lawyers are the ones that are doing the prosecuting.
Not at all.
Norman, Michael says the substantiated cases fall through the cracks.
I think what Michael means by
that's
that...
not. Is that a fact that they fall through the cracks? Don't
Well,
they in
I
fact
think
go to this trial process that we're talking about? Whether or not you're happy with the process, don't they in fact go to the trial process? They don't fall through the cracks.
There's two
do they?
problems. I think that there are many cases where the citizen says the cop did X and the cop says he didn't do X, and it's one-on-one without any witnesses. Overwhelming percentage of those cases, even the civilian board gives the cop the benefit of the doubt. We have encouraged hearings so that people can make judgments of credibility by looking at the cop and the citizen in the eye and figure out who's telling the truth. The second part is, and that's what I was talking about, that even when the CCRB sends to the police commissioner a recommendation that the complaint is valid, there's way too many of those cases that don't wind up with discipline against the police officer. And my experience, not as extensive as yours, in the oath proceedings, which is where the trial goes, I came out concerned that the vigor of the prosecution of the police officer was not adequate enough.
Mr. Smurdy, where do you stand on residency requirement? You know, there are a number of people who suggest that if police officers lived in the city in which they protect it, in which they serve, in which they do their 8-hour tours, that they would be more connected with the community, understand the culture, and get to know people and just feel good about the area. As it stands, as Mr. Siegel pointed out earlier, they zoom into town, do their tour, and then leave and go back to Nassau County, Suffolk, Westchester, wherever they live. Many of those do not live in the city. What's your position on residency requirement, and would that help improve police-residence relations?
I'm against it. The New York City Police Department is the finest in the world, and I don't think that you should
And
limit
could it not
the
be
pool.
improved? Could it not be improved?
Well,
Mr.
let
Siegel,
him finish,
anything
Mr.
can be
Smurdy.
improved.
Thank you.
I think New York City lawyers are the best lawyers in the nation. Can they be improved? Of course. I think New York City doctors are the best doctors in the nation.
And cop
best
bashing
surgeons.
in New York City is done better than it is anywhere else.
But the difference about a police officer as opposed to the doctor and the lawyer, it's the only group of people that we give a gun to and allow them to use physical and deadly physical force. And because of that, you have to set up mechanisms that are different than the lawyers and the doctors and the bookkeepers and the CPAs, etc.
Well, where
I'm
they
glad
live
you
may
mentioned
not
it.
be such a
Excuse me.
mechanism.
We're really running low on time. Norman, I just wanted you to comment quickly on the residency requirement, and then we're going to go around the room with a quick prediction. I'll give you the question.
I'm
but
for
just
it for
quick.
two reasons. One, I think it'll
30
give
seconds.
better police relations, but second, we still have a problem. A city of 57% people of color, only about 25% of the police force are people of color. For diversity purposes, for affirmative action, I say that people have to live in the city.
One question, we're just going to go around the room for a prediction. Do we need a joint board for police corruption and abuse of power? Who's going to win the battle between the city council and the mayor in this? What's going to fall by the wayside, and how will this play itself out?
Well, there shouldn't
Norman,
be a battle.
Quickly.
We shouldn't play politics on this issue. There should be one civilian board, jurisdiction over brutality and corruption. They're linked together. It doesn't have to be huge. It could be less than 24 people if they're quality people.
Mr. Smurdy?
The CCRB should be downsized. It should only deal with serious complaints of assault, abuse, etc. Anything else should be handled on the precinct level. As far as corruption is concerned, even though a couple of cases, and I say a couple of cases, have fallen through the cracks, I think Internal Affairs has done a very good job of policing the police.
Eric?
I agree with Mr. Smurdy. I think there's too much cop watching, too much cop bashing, and a tendency to intimidate police officers, tie their hands behind their back, prevent them from doing their jobs properly. I think the mayor has given in the sense that he's created this corruption board. I think he'll succeed in getting it through the council. I don't think that the CCRB and the corruption board should be merged. CCRB will survive on its own.
I think the CCRB is doing a good job. I think it can do better. I think the mayor has compounded the problem by coming up with a board of his own. I think we need to let the CCRB do its job and see if they can get the job done. In any case, we're running low on time. I want to thank you, Mr. Smurdy, for joining us, both guests. Mr. Siegel, thanks for being here.
Thank
We
you,
really
Eric.
appreciate it.
Thank you, Bruce.
And on one last note before we close for the evening, Eric, were you convinced of anything in this debate?
Well, you know, Michael, residency requirements are a complicated question. I'll tell you, my instinct is no. My instinct is that you're not going to get better cops by determining where they live. But I can't say I've ever been 100% on this issue. And when you or Norman Siegel discuss the importance of having cops or other city workers who live in the city, I think hard about it. So yeah, you score there with regard to me and my thinking.
Oh, thank you. Eric, you made some good points. I think that the long and short of it is that the most insidious part of this in some ways is still reading and still hearing about a small percentage now, as we say, a group of police officers who are still preying on communities that they're supposed to protect. And I do believe that a residency requirement would sensitize more officers to the neighborhood and get them more interested in caring about the people that they serve. But we're running out of time. We're going to disagree on this particular issue and many others, I'm sure, during the course of the season. That's all the time we have for this week, and I want to thank you for watching Flashpoint. Join us again next week when we hear what former Mayor David Dinkins has to say about the state of the city. Until then, for Progressive Thinking, I'm Michael Kottman.
And for conservative values, I'm Eric Brindell. Thanks for joining us. See you next week.